class. Okay, great. So we're at week 2 of our class for advanced data modeling in a day, the Microsoft material. So we last left off at the lab for module 1, which was pretty simple. So we'll kind of go through that quickly, see if anybody had any questions or concerns on it. And then we'll jump into the slides, and there's a demo within the slides today. There's a couple things that maybe people could pick up on. I know when I read through it a little bit earlier, I was like, oh yeah, I kind of knew that, but it helped reinforce a few things. So it's always good to see that. We don't have as many slides to go through as we did last week, so I think it could be a little bit more relaxed. So if you have questions as they come up, feel free to come off mute and just ask them when at the time of that slide. I think we'll be okay on time. If you haven't yet, make sure you join Slack. Let me switch over to that. Michelle is posting the recordings of our sessions, and there's questions out there, and you can see Michelle put a question earlier that something that she, I guess you deleted it now or something, huh?
Deleted them, but I do have questions I want to share with you.
But it looked like she was working ahead in the lab, so she's an overachiever and doing well. So if you haven't joined Slack, let me post the link. The link is now in the chat. And throughout this course, we'll be using these 2 downloads. So you want to make sure you get to this channel to get these links. And just in case you're having issues getting there, I will put that into the Slack today too, in case anybody, or into the chat, I mean.
And if anybody has trouble signing into Slack, feel free to put your email address in the chat, and then I will invite you going the other way around.
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so I'm sorry, I got the demo script up. I meant to have the lab script up. Let me move the demo script over here. Okay, so you were assigned lab 1 at the end of last week, which was pretty simple. About 15 minutes to get through it, where you go to wherever you downloaded the actuals file, connect it to Excel, bring in these tables, and then that's the start of your data model, and you're going to hopefully change one type to text. And that was really all that was need to be done. If you've worked with Power BI before and done your own data model, it should be something that you're quite familiar with. Anybody have problems on lab 1 or anything that we want to go over some more in lab 1?
I was fine with lab 1.
Okay.
I guess I would just throw in that, this is Ahmed, that I didn't know that it would do the right thing with the zip codes when you changed it to read it as text, because like if you're used to Excel, it craps on it before you even do anything, right? So it'll read it in. So like that was great. That was great to see that.
Good.
You know what I mean? The leading zeros getting lost.
Right. Right. Yeah, because if it thinks it's numbers, and it'll take the leading zeros off. So, by changing it to text, it'll keep the leading zeros there. Okay, good. All right, move that back over. All right, so we'll get into the slides. Is this big enough? Everybody can see this well?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, so we're going to get a little bit deeper into the language that Power Query uses, M. I don't know why they ever named it M. It's an interesting item. I know it confused me for the longest time getting started with it, but a lot of people just call it the Power Query language. All right, so our objectives is, it's going to be basic and some overview of M. If you've worked with it before, maybe it'll just be a little bit of refresher, but hopefully we'll all learn a little something from here. It is a very, very powerful language. The thing that I like about M, to kind of just give a little bit more color to things now, is if you work in an enterprise and you actually produce tabular models that are hosted, say, like on Azure or on-prem or something like that, you could use Power Query and M. You could use the M language there. You could use it in Power BI. Recently, they released it in Azure Data Factory. It used to be called data wrangling over in that area. Now it's part of ADF. And it even in the later releases of SQL Server integration services, I haven't tried it, but I think there's a way you could use Power Query /M in that as well. Right, so it's starting to become this idea of learning this one kind of ETL or ELT, however you want to think about it, language, to start doing a lot of your transforms. So the better you can get with it in the long run, the more your skills will transfer to other areas. Right, you might be doing some Power Query and a Power BI. That may get more sophisticated, that you move up to ADF and be able to do very similar things. So, all right, so let's move on to the next slide. So why M? As we were talking about it, it does have some amazing transformation ways in it, right? So you're going to take these. It's kind of interesting to show the little parts here of all of your data, trying to pull it together inside of your cube and get your cube organized really well. I've also seen this from Lego blocks type of thing, right? But you're trying to get your right shape of your data, which into a cube based upon the star schema, which I think we covered a little bit last time. Then Power BI reporting is really going to run well. There are 3 different ways to write your M code, and it obviously goes from simple to more advanced. You're going to use the ribbon, which is how most everybody gets started with it. Or you're going to use your ribbon. You're going to do your clicky, draggy, droppy, and then open it up and adjust it, say off of just the one line that you see at the top, and we'll see that here in a little bit when we go into Power BI. Or you could actually just write custom code yourself. We know a couple people that are that kind of pride themselves. If you ever follow Alex Powers from Microsoft, either on Twitter or other things, actually him and somebody else just gave this class, and actually 2 separate days. They did it at a faster pace just this week. But he kind of prides himself that he almost starts to do M code always through custom code. He might do some of it starting off, but he's a lot more advanced. He has a challenge we'll talk about, is what's called query folding. We'll try to get into that at some point throughout this course, and his 30-day challenge for it. Okay, and I'm probably going to switch over to make this even bigger. Hopefully everybody can kind of see these ribbons. So these are your different ribbons across Power Query. And everything that you could kind of do with it. But let's kind of run down this part a little bit. So M, the language that is being used, right, is the language to transform your data in Power BI. There's multiple ribbons that you can go across, right? The home ribbon, your transform, add column, and view, and you can see that over on the right side of the page. Turn on the formula bar in order to see the syntax that M generates. So That's pretty important, or at least in my book, it's pretty important. I like to see what it shows, and you could see down here at the very bottom on the view tab is where you could click on and off that formula bar. I like to see what it does produce, so that every time that I do something through the click interface, or through these ribbons, that I'm seeing what comes out of it. And I'll scan it, read it, and the more I do that, the more I start to understand what's happening, and understand the syntax. If you want to see everything, you could go into Advanced Editor. You could get to Advanced Editor on a couple different ribbons, right? So the Home ribbon and the View ribbon. We walk through all of these items, right? So your keep rows, remove rows is filtering at the row level. Choosing columns or removing columns is going to take away columns, right? To help you say, here's a bunch of columns I don't need to bring in. I tend to like to choose columns a whole lot, because it does give me a gear that I could go back and change it later on. Remove columns might do the same thing. A lot of times these buttons, a lot of them will generate the exact same code. So you just kind of want to look at it a little bit just to see if it does or it doesn't. And you might find your own preferences, what you like to choose and what you like to do. On the transform ribbon, this has a lot of different functionality. So your split column, pivot columns, or pivot them, right? If Corey was here, who's one of the leaders of this group, he always talks about, he tries one and then realizes he needs the other, and he just kind of keeps changing it. So he just likes to kind of play with it, and that's fine. That's great to do it through here. Transpose, which is another concept that you see in Excel. Boy, I can't say I ever used reverse rows. I just noticed it there. There's things that you could use that'll group your columns, right? There's group by up here, right? So you can kind of produce a summary table. There's a count rows there. I'd have to look to see closer on it.
Kevin, can I?
Yeah.
This is Amit. And maybe this is not making sense, but up in the first tab under keep rows and remove rows, if I'm understanding correctly, like, was I do this right, and then sometimes you might be excluding one item. Let's say it's based there, it's categorical data, and so you're excluding one thing, or maybe you're only including one thing, and I haven't talked to this. So it makes some kind of inference about whether, like, how to record that in the script, so that, of course, next time when you run it, it does the same. Because if you uncheck one box, it could either say don't include that box, or it could say include A or B or C or D or E or F or G or H. Do you know what I mean? And it decides. Doesn't it make some decision onto how to record that?
It could, right?
And I was just wondering if people, if there's any general understanding of how it does that. Does it do it based on whatever's shorter? Like, it's shorter to say don't include, if you have A through Z and you unclick the Z, it's shorter to say don't keep Z, like, keep the rows that don't equal Z, versus keep the rows that equal A or B or C or D up through Y.
Well, so some of that, right, it might be a little bit different of a filtering, right? And so let's kind of go through it inside Power BI, right? So this is the formula bar, right, which I recommend keeping on, which you could turn on and off over in your view ribbon. But I think where you're talking a little bit is, like, here is a really simple way to filter rows as well. So now if I just say I don't want to select all, but I only want A, B, and E, right, in your example.
Yeah. Right. And
Now
here, go ahead.
You'll see what it produced was an OR statement. Now, if
you went back that filter and you instead chose everything but one thing.
Yeah, well, let's see.
Well, let's say you did it through the other interface.
Yeah, I'm gonna take this back away, and so I'm gonna have select all, but I just don't want banner.
Well, you see how that's a little bit smart, right? Because it
Mhm.
could have just applied the same logic and said equals and then 7 different things. And I mean, again, it could be just this, and the reason why it matters is because when you bring in new data, you get a different result, right? I mean, if
Exactly.
this, and so that kind of subtlety, I mean, I guess I don't know whether to like it or not, that Power BI kind of uses some intelligence to decide which way to code it, because
But
it
I,
gives me a
but I
different
think
result.
I think from um, your point, right, is look at the code being generated, because if all of a sudden somebody adds banner 2 in here, right, the
Yes,
not equal banner is going to do it. Now, if I
yeah,
do it this way,
right.
what comes up? Well, it did
You're,
the same thing,
yeah.
right?
No, so but your point, you're right. You made the right point. It's just that you have to look at the code because your logic that it's capturing might not capture the logic you intend if
Right,
it did it the other way. That's the
right.
best. That's really
Yep.
the takeaway. Thank you.
The other ribbon, let me go back to this. Yeah, I guess this is a little older view because you notice there's tools on here now as well. So I don't know if we'll end up going through some of this, but the advanced editor, right? So the advanced editor shows you the complete syntax of what's in there, right? And each one of these are steps, and each step is going to link to the previous step by the step name. So source, and you see here it's using the source table and going through it, right? Or this source variable. Somebody talked about each one of these being variables. I kind of like that language. I'm gonna start trying to. So this becomes a variable that's equal to, that's assigned to an Excel workbook. This becomes a variable that's assigned to the campaign table, campaign dim table within that Excel workbook. This variable becomes assigned to a table transformation columns, and you can see it's changing all of these types, and it's doing multiples all within one step, right? But each one is linked to the previous step by this name. It doesn't have to always be in order. I could put something in the middle here that is linked back to source. That gets pretty advanced. But then at the bottom, you'll have this is what you're returning. And so you're returning one of these. Normally it's the last one because you want to return everything that you have from your steps that you've done. Okay. All right. So I kind of like this slide. And if you noticed, even on the previous slide, this red, M is case sensitive, where DAX is not case sensitive. And so that's one of the biggest things to remember when you're working with both languages, right? And so when you're in the Power Query, you're in Transform, everything is case sensitive, and including as it's looking at the data and everything, right? So um, make sure that you keep that in mind, or you could end up with some concern or with some issues. All right, so your basic concepts in M. So the syntax goes with, you have some type of object and then an action against that object, right? So that's this first part here. And the objects can be a table, a list, a record, some text, a number, date, pretty much anything. And then the objects, which are written in a case to help you be able to read them, right? So capitalizing the first letter of each word within there. It's known as camel case. And that's to make it a little bit more readable, right? So to list, day of week, to number, from text, right? Those are all good examples of actions. So when you see that second part of it, think about what is the object and what is the action, okay?
And I mean, Kevin, this is Omni, and
Mhm.
I don't want to be too like detail oriented, but I wish they, instead of calling it objects, these are really types of objects. Like a table it's not the actual table like customer dim. It's just table, like it's just the type of, so it's like, that's why it's table dot whatever, because you still have to put customer dim in the parentheses, because another language you would do customer dim dot, whatever the action is, but instead you do table dot the action, and then you put customer dim in parentheses, which is it's wordy. It's really wordy. You end up having to
For naming the functions that you're using, right?
yeah.
So it's the object type
It's the object type is
dot the action.
Yeah, that's
right?
what I mean. I wish it said object
So like
type, because that's what it is.
text dot from text, right? Or
Yeah, exactly.
right, table dot remove columns, right? So the object that we want to work on is expected to be a table, and off of that table we want to remove columns.
Right.
The table object, the variable that we're working with is going to be added custom from an earlier step, right? So it's going to try to make sure that this reference here, this variable that it basically uses, can be instantiated as a table object. And then it's going to remove custom. So that's how you would read that. And I guess you're right, it could get wordy, right? But it's really helping you break down what am I expecting to work against? Well, I'm expecting to work against a table object.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just pointing out, I think in the stuff that Microsoft put together, they, instead of calling it object, because really removed columns is the object, or added custom is the object, they could call it object type. And but
that's the action you're performing against this object type.
Yeah, object type, right? It's
so
an object.
This object, the object type is table. The action I'm performing is add column. That's their syntax. And it helps, especially if you start working with a lot more, when you get to write your own, right? And you're looking through the vast number of functions available, right? You may get to a very specific type of object type that you're going to work with that's going to help you do that. I was reading something with an Access database or something the other day, right? So when you go through the documentation, to understand this syntax, I think will help you read their documentation a little bit more. But that's what they're trying to break down for you, is this is how they chose to do their naming of objects, right? And these objects could be this, and there's a bunch more, and then an action against it. Okay, so then the helper words, you'll know they're helper words because they're never capitalized, right? They're not going to be put together in the camel case like the actions are, the actions or the objects, right? The objects are going to be usually a single word with the first letter capitalized, and then the actions are multiple words put together in camel case. The helper words are always lowercase. So let, in, each is a helper word. If, then, else, all of these ones that are listed there. And then some of the key punctuation, it uses the square brackets to reference a column, and it uses the curly brackets to reference a list, or in some languages consider this an array. A list and an array are almost the same thing. And so that's within the curly brackets. So when you're reading it, make sure you're reading what the bracket type is, so that you have it, and hopefully your bracket, I guess all brackets are busted nowadays anyway, so.
Is that a joke? Wait, brackets are busted?
It's kind of, it didn't
March
land
Madness?
exactly well, right? So. I'm trying, guys. I'm trying to make it fun, but I'm, not as good as I used to be. All right.
Blame it on Zoom.
Yeah, I will. So then you also have the hashtag keywords. Like if you want to produce a new date, you could just simply type in hashtag date and give it the year, month, and day. Or you could say hashtag date, and you could take a column off of the object that you're working on, a table or a list or whatever, and you're going to give it the year, right? So this is a column because it's in square brackets, month and day. Those will both produce a date within your M language. Date time, same thing. It's just you end up having the time part added onto it, or time if you just want the time. The time zone goes into even more precision, right? So this is going to be the time zone portion here, the 0900. If you want to work with a table within your M, you can use hashtag table, and then you're going to open up that function. And then within this list object are your columns. So the first one is defining column X and Y, and then these are the values for your X and Y, right? So it's a list within a list. The 0 and 1 for X in this case, within this list, this curly bracket, and then this outside list is all the rows up to there. Duration is another artifact that you could produce, right? Or a literal, or and then there's ones for binary, infinity, not a number, sections, shared, right? And you could look at the documentation to see if you what more. But when it's done by a hashtag, right? It's a keyword. All right, so text functions. This is a neat little slide because it's going to return, if you're really used to Excel, which a lot of people kind of start with Excel and then try to roll into Power BI from there, it might be able to help you out a little bit, but it's a little comparison to it. What it's mainly pointing out here is M, its ordinal or its numbering index starts at 0, where Excel's starts at 1. And so that's a key difference. So in this case, it's showing a couple examples of comparing a function in Excel, that function being left, to you would use text because it's the object dot start, the action, the column that you're looking at, and start at 3, and it's going to return ABC from this column because it's using my column right off of this table. Excel would do the same thing. The range is similar to the mid function in Excel, but you notice that you're starting at ordinal 4 rather than ordinal 5 because of the positioning, right? Because we start at 0. And then position of the number 5 in my column, or search, right? They're going to return actually different results. This will return 7 because it's our offset is 0. And this is going to return 8 because the offset is 1, the starting point. That's a pretty important concept. And different languages use different things. SQL, I know, uses a lot. It starts at 1 as well. I think it kind of came up on something else that I sit in on. And some people from Microsoft, they were kind of said, well, why is that? And it's like, well, it's just the team that implemented it. It's kind of the background you come in from programming. So, but it is important to know. Okay, so here's some more good comparison on what you're going to get to help you translate from M to from Excel to M. And let me just get rid of that. Sorry. Otherwise, it's just going to keep popping up and down. Gotta hate it when work gets in the way, right? So we kind of covered left. Right is you could use the text.end function. Mid, we covered. You could use range. Let me think. Oh, again, it's kind of picking up what the difference is here, right? Where you're going to use 5 versus 4, right? So range here is telling you to start at offset 4 from 0 and go for 3. This is saying start from 5 and go for 3, so it returns 3 characters.
You know, Kevin, I would say this is when you talked about like with Cody and the pivot and the unpivot, and you just try it and see which one works. Like I always end up doing that with the substrings. Like I just can never really remember.
Yeah, I would say I do a lot too, just because I move from language to language sometimes. But which is why, in many of the platforms, as many as I could use that just use one, if I'm going to get to mostly using M around Data Factory and everything else, then there's less context switching I have to do. But I don't have to read through each one of these. Hopefully, does anybody have any questions on any of these? I think it's a good reference.
I mean, one of the things, I mean, I just want to, one of the things I've noticed, M is so much more fussy about types than say Excel, like, and maybe DAX, I don't know, but M is extremely precise about types. Like if you try and do contain, it's text.contains, but my column is actually like a numeric column. It's not gonna, coerce it to a text type. Like you have to explicitly be like,
you could come up with just like no results, right? So yeah, Excel does a lot more things behind the scenes. Okay, so let's go back to our Power BI. I'm gonna close a couple of the windows out before I bring it back up. Cancel, so I guess whatever I put in there. All right. So in this demo, what they're looking for us to do is to talk about calculated columns, right? Which is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in what we're doing, right? But there's multiple ways to add columns to tables, right? You could do it in DAX with a calculated column, and it looks really, really close to M, right? But this here is the DAX language and not the M language, because I'm working inside the data portion, right, of Power BI, not the transform, not the Power Query. And so it's producing this price band here as it's calling a calculated column. And that's all fine and dandy. There's a lot of discussion that I've seen about what the better place to do it. And the one model that keeps coming out from Matthew Roach, which I respect him a whole lot too. His statement is as far upstream as possible, as far downstream as necessary, which means that if you could do it sooner, right, do it. One of the things that when things are talked about in a small model here for price band, it's probably not going to change the compression of the model a whole lot. But because of the point that the compression all occurs at, on a large model, if this had a lot of rows in this product table, it might not compress the same way as if you did it in Power Query. And so that's one of the reasons that people kind of train to say, move up to Power Query. So if we look at this table over in Power Query, that would be the product table. So we could see we don't have the same column, right? We don't have anything that is deriving the price band. But we could, right? I mean, we could build a whole new column here by coming into the add column. And we're going to get a little bit deeper into this in just a little bit because we're going to get into the if then else syntax and stuff like that. So I think I'll come back to this. Actually, they provided me the code. So let's, like if I just come in here and click custom column, And I go back to my script because I don't like to actually type. Move down. Is this the lab? Sorry, guys.
Just make sure they don't have any typos in it.
Yeah, really. All right. All right. Hey, look at that. Oh, it works just fine, right? So I could put a similar if statement at this level. Actually, I'll just call it Power Query band and click OK. And if we go, and you see this has data type of any. So I'm probably going to want to change my type as well to be text. And then I could do my close and apply. Oh, and I should have tested this. I didn't realize it was going to take this long.
Hey, Kevin, it's Michelle.
Yeah, go ahead.
While that's, if someone says the word calculated column, are they only talking about something that happens in DAX?
I would say it's probably mixed depending on the person, because people love to use the same term over and over again. So probably some people say it's a calculated column that they did in Power Query, or it was a calculated column in DAX, right?
Okay.
So yeah, you hear the word. I tend to think when I hear calculated column, I tend to think DAX, but that's more because I'm kind of OCD on language, or at least language in the technical terms. That I will say, I did a calculated column to mean I did it in DAX, or I did add column to say I did it in Power Query. But you'd have to know me to know my idiosyncrasies that I'm going to be that precise. And I might even slip and say one or the other, because the name calculated column is used in both places. So you might have to look.
So for those of us studying for the DA 100, when we see the word calculated column, can we assume that Microsoft is trying to direct us to think about DAX, or could it be anything?
I'd have to probably see the rest of the context of the question, right? But I would say probably on the DA 100, they're most likely going to be look at it from the modeling tools. It doesn't get a whole lot into as much in the Power Query as you would think in the DA 100. That could have changed. There could be more questions on it. But if they say you're going to transform the data and add a calculated column, well, that's kind of implying add column. If they're talking about it in Power BI in the model view, then that's going to be DAX. I don't think that it's going to be that tricky. So, okay, so you see we get the exact same value. So it's two ways of doing the same thing. All right, so let's kind of get back to our slides. So
Is
the
there
if then else.
benefit of doing it one way versus another?
If doing it in Power Query, again, I would kind of do it sooner than later, right? Kind of that as far upstream as possible, because if you do it in Power Query when it gets into Power BI and it's actually trying to do its compression at that point, it could compress better because it has those values. It's going to compress differently when it does it as a DAX calculated column. But that might only impact you if you have a large model. But if you're going to get up to large models, you want to know these things. Otherwise, you may not even notice a difference.
What's the number of records that would distinguish a large model? Millions, billions, terabytes?
Well, the number of records is going to depend on the records in the table because each table is compressed on its own, right? But yeah, high millions is going to get you. Some people might even say billions. You just we could get into at the end. I don't know that today, but later, maybe one of our catch-up time, how you see what the compression looks like within like DAX Studio and stuff like that. I've seen it even in models that I've had that were just thousands of rows. I've seen dramatic differences just in how I did the data model, and it actually ended up impacting performance. So when you're looking into performance, you want to really understand that part of it. Okay. We're doing pretty good on time. I think we just got a few more slides to get through here. Okay, so if then else, right? Which is a very big, oh, I didn't know I had a 1 o'clock meeting. Is, I would say, used quite a bit. So it's given some basic syntax and some good examples here. And again, we know that these are helpers, right? So they're all in lowercase. So the very simple, right, is just your if, then, and else. So your condition, when it's positive, when it's false, right? When it's true, when it's false. You could chain them together. So if this condition, then I want to go ahead and return column 2. Else, I'm going to do another if. Some other languages even have an else if that doesn't exist here. So you just put if in the next part. Then I'm going to return something else. I'm going to do another if statement. Then I'm going to return something else. I'll return null. Nest it. So this you might have to look at a couple times to understand the difference, right? But it is different because it's if my condition, then, and then I have multiple if statements within that true condition. So it's if this condition, then I'm going to return cost, else if this condition, then I'm going to return sales, else I'll return null. And then this else, and they formatted it nicely for us, goes back to this first if statement, where this chained is all one right after another, which is a lot of ways that you see people write it, but there's no reason you couldn't write it this way either. And it kind of comes back to Amin's point, right? Is you got to just logically think through what you're looking for and which way you want it to work. And it might also be a personal preference on it.
Kevin, do either of these editors, the DAX editor or the Power Creator, do they indent for you to help you see what you wrote? Like, you know, other environments, I don't know if one of the helper tools you've talked about, like DAX Studio.
For Power Query for M, no. And there's not a tool that formats it nicely that I'm aware of. I'm always just in a habit of doing my own indenting. For DAX, when you have a model with that you're using, which a lot of times you're building your model out, you could open Tabular Editor, and Tabular Editor has a button built into it that will send the DAX over to DAX Formatter, which is something the SQL BI team wrote, and then it'll return a formatted way. And there's actually scripting you could do in Tabular Editor to format all your measures at one time, which is really, really nice. A lot of times there's the Italians, if you know who I'm talking about, Marco and Alberto, will tell you that you have not written DAX unless you actually formatted your DAX. So,
well, what do they have to say about Power Query then?
Yeah,
There's no
they don't talk a whole lot about Power Query. Their bread and butter is DAX. So, okay. So you could also put multiple conditions in here, right? In this case, you're going to have a condition, and you can see you're going to wrap it in parentheses. So column, the text length of column 2 is equals to 3, or the text length of column 2 equals 2. then whatever, you're gonna send back true, else you send back false. So you wrap it with parentheses, you got an or keyword here. There are also the double pipes, right? Or the and, which could be used for logical or logical and. This is another one of those that what they're trying to convey here is by how you end up writing the condition could end up showing you different dialogues. And it's doing the same thing. It's just a different setup. Actually, I'm going to bring these comments up because that's their main point here. Is how a calculated column, the main point here is how a conditional column looks to create the if then else, and how the code appears in the formula bar versus if you added a custom column and wrote the code yourself. But these examples here, you get the same thing. It just becomes a preference of which way you like to do it. Kind of back to what you were talking about right on the filtering, and right? There's multiple ways to skin the cat here. And whoever implemented this dialogue decided this technique. Whoever implemented this dialogue decided the different technique. Maybe other reasons behind what the dialogue does behind it, but in the end, the same result will occur. And you may choose to use one versus the other because you like to have this dialogue as you're getting started. As you get better, more advanced, you might want to write it yourself and you come into here. And then you just want this to help you know what columns are available and help you write the syntax. And then this is talking about columns from examples. And we could go back into Power BI a little bit here, but the column from examples is extremely powerful in adding new columns. I really like it. I don't know if you've ever used it before. Let me see if I could get one to work real quick. We'll go back to our.
I'll be impressed if you can get that to label the high, medium, low buckets.
No, I don't think I could get it to label the column from examples. I don't know that I could get it to do that. Boy, that would be impressive, wouldn't it? But they already have it on there. But let's just start with campaign, right? And if I wanted to come over here and do column, and I invoke column from examples, you could say from all columns from selection, right? So if I select these two, so now it's only going to look at those two, right? And if I come down to line 4, and because it's simpler, right? I could do SEO mobile, hit enter, and now it knows what I'm actually trying to do is concatenate these two columns together. And you can see it took this as an example and it said, oh, okay. And here it shows you the code it's going to write. And you can see it knows to put my space in there, right? If I actually wanted that to be a dash instead of a space. See, now I went and changed my formula up here where I put the dash in. And so it's a very simple way if you didn't know that you wanted to write the text dot combine. You know, it's nice. I like it in some cases. So we'll go ahead and leave it in there. All right, we have 7 minutes left. And we could introduce our lab 2, If I could get to that slide. So your lab 2 will have 3 parts to it to complete. Let me see if I could pull, I know I have it open here, guys. Find the right browser. It's going to be the other one. It's always the other one that I select. So going down. Okay, so all your instructions are still within this file that you should have downloaded already. It'll walk you through exactly what it's trying, what it's trying to do. The first one, it tells you in here, about 30 minutes. I don't know exactly where the next ones are, but another 30 minutes, and then maybe the third one's another 30 minutes. So, an hour and a half of your time between now and next week. And if you run into questions or whatever, please use the Slack group. My brain loves to context switch for some odd reason, so I like seeing the squirrels. So hit the Slack group, and if I have a minute, I will distract myself and answer the question.
You better be careful what you ask for, Kevin.
Right?
You want squirrels? Oh,
Believe me, I'm on so many of them, and I know how to mute them and everything else. So
What do you call a whole bunch of squirrels? Is it a pack of squirrels? A herd of squirrels? You know what I mean? Like
I don't know.
a cackle of squirrels? I don't know.
I don't know. That's a good question. Let's find out.
I guarantee no one's heard about what a group of skunks is called. I figured that out the other day because I had a group of skunks at my place.
What's the answer?
It's like a seafert, a scurry. There you go.
Holy crap! I didn't know that would be a thing.
There's-
These are some of the most esoteric words in the English language.
Surfeit. Yep, surfeit.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, that's not a good one to me. Wait, so scurry was the other one? A scurry of squirrels?
Yeah.
Was that what it was?
Sorry. Yep.
All right, headed your way.
So I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Any thoughts? Any feedback? Is this, hopefully it's useful for everybody? Even if you know a lot of it, maybe you got a little refresher or a little